In the heart of Brooklyn, amidst towering buildings and rapidly changing neighborhoods, stood Olivia's Diner. The neon sign flickered slightly, a relic of the past struggling to keep up with the times. Inside, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, a comforting aroma that had once drawn customers from all over. But times had changed. Once a bustling neighborhood gem, the diner now faced empty tables and dwindling foot traffic. A sleek, modern cafe had recently opened just a few blocks away, Le Petit Soleil, a French bistro with marble countertops and overpriced espressos. It had stolen away the younger crowd, the ones who used to sip coffee at Olivia's counter while typing away on their laptops. At the center of it all stood Olivia Jackson, the proud yet weary owner of the diner. She was in her late 40s, with auburn hair always tied up in a loose bun and tired eyes that had seen both the best and worst days of the business. She had inherited Olivia's Diner from her grandfather, Samuel Jackson, who had founded it right after World War II. For years, she had fought to keep his legacy alive. But some mornings, like today, she wondered if she was fighting a losing battle. The clock above the counter read 8 a.m. With a practiced motion, Olivia tied her apron around her waist and stepped into the kitchen, the same way she had every day for the past 15 years. She moved on autopilot, cracking eggs onto the griddle, flipping pancakes, stirring a pot of creamy clam chowder. The sizzling sounds of breakfast filled the empty diner, but there was no one there to enjoy it. "How much longer can I keep doing this?" she muttered under her breath. She glanced toward the entrance.
Soon he would arrive.
At exactly 9 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. A tall, elderly man walked in, his silver hair combed neatly, his movements slow but deliberate. Robert Miller. He was 78 years old, and for the past decade, he had come to Olivia's Diner every single morning. He always sat at the same booth in the corner, always ordered the same meal, clam chowder and buttered toast. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," Olivia greeted with a warm, albeit tired, smile. "Morning, Olivia. You're up early as always," he said as he eased into his seat. "Someone's gotta keep this place running," she said, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Black, no sugar, just how you like it." Robert chuckled, a deep, knowing sound. "You always remember, don't you?" he mused. "You've been coming here longer than some of my employees, Mr. Miller." "Of course, I remember." She placed his usual meal in front of him, steaming clam chowder, thick with potatoes and clams, served with a side of golden brown toast. But today, as he took his first sip of coffee, he looked at Olivia a little differently. "You ever wonder why I come here every day?" he asked, stirring his chowder absent-mindedly. Olivia frowned slightly. She had never questioned it. "Because you like my food," she joked. Robert chuckled again, but shook his head.
"No, Olivia.
I come here because if it weren't for this diner, I wouldn't be here at all." His voice grew quieter, his eyes distant, as if looking at something far away, something only he could see. It was 1954. The war had ended, but for people like me, life was still a battlefield. Olivia set down the coffee pot, suddenly aware that whatever he was about to say, it was something important. "I was 8 years old when I lost my parents.
Un car accident.
One day they were there. The next day they weren't. Just like that, I became a kid with no home, no family, and nowhere to go." Olivia's heart clenched. She had always known Robert as the quiet, well-dressed old man who enjoyed his morning routine. She had never imagined he had once been a lost, hungry child. "For months, I wandered the streets of Brooklyn. I slept in alleys, stole scraps from trash cans, begged strangers for change. Winter was the hardest. I remember shivering so hard that my teeth wouldn't stop chattering. I was nothing more than a stray dog in the city, ignored and forgotten. He paused, staring at his bowl of chowder, as if remembering another bowl from decades ago. Then one day, I smelled something. Something warm, something rich. It led me here, to this diner. Olivia felt her breath catch. Your grandfather was standing behind the counter. He saw me through the window, standing there, starving and desperate. And you know what he did? She didn't dare to answer. He walked outside, looked me in the eye, and said, "Kid, you look hungry. Come inside." Robert chuckled softly, shaking his head. I was too scared to move at first. I thought it was a trick, or maybe he'd ask me for money I didn't have. But he didn't. He just held the door open, waiting patiently. And when I finally stepped inside, he didn't ask questions. He just put a bowl of hot clam chowder in front of me and said, "Eat, son. No one should go hungry here." Olivia felt her throat tighten. She had heard stories about her grandfather's generosity, but never anything like this. That was the first real meal I'd had in weeks. And I swear, Olivia, that one bowl of soup saved my life. Robert's voice trembled slightly. From that day on, I kept coming back. And every single day, your grandfather would feed me. He never asked for a single penny. He just said, "Come back every day at this time. There will always be food for you here." Tears pricked Olivia's eyes. She could almost see it, a small, frightened boy, standing outside the very diner she had been trying so hard to keep alive. Eventually, I started washing dishes, running errands. I wanted to give back in whatever way I could. And then one day, your grandfather sat me down and gave me an envelope. Inside was a few $100s. Robert took a deep breath. He told me, "This isn't charity. This is an investment. Take this money, go to school, and make something of yourself." Silence filled the diner. Even the coffee machine seemed to have quieted down, as if the very walls were listening. That money got me through high school. It helped me get my first job. It changed everything. And now, here I am, an old man, sitting in the same booth, eating the same chowder, in the same diner that once saved my life. He looked up at Olivia, his eyes shining with something she couldn't quite name. And that, Olivia, is why I come here every day. Olivia stood frozen, her hands gripping the coffee pot so tightly her knuckles turned white. The diner was silent except for the occasional bubbling of soup on the stove. The old wooden floors creaked slightly as she shifted her weight, absorbing the enormity of Robert's words. "You mean to tell me," she started slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "that my grandfather, Samuel Jackson, saved your life?" Robert nodded, a quiet smile playing on his lips. "He didn't just save my life, Olivia. He gave me a future. He gave me hope when I had none. And this diner," he gestured around, his aged hands trembling slightly, "this place was the first real home I ever had." Olivia felt something crack inside her. She had spent years struggling to keep Olivia's diner afloat, questioning whether it was worth it, whether it was foolish to keep fighting for something that seemed like it was slipping through her fingers. But now, she realized, this diner wasn't just hers.
It wasn't just her grandfather's.
It belonged to stories like Robert's, stories of kindness, of second chances, of the way one small act of generosity could change a person's life. She cleared her throat, blinking away the moisture in her eyes. "Mr. Miller, she began, but before she could finish, the bell above the diner's entrance jingled again. A delivery worker walked in, holding a thick envelope. "Olivia Jackson?" the man asked. "That's me," she replied, still dazed. "This is from Miller Industries," he said, handing it to her. The name made Olivia's stomach flip. Miller Industries. She had heard of it, of course. Everyone in New York had. It was one of the largest construction and development firms in the country. They built skyscrapers, luxury hotels, entire business districts. She turned to Robert, who was sipping his coffee, watching her with amusement. Miller Industries, she repeated slowly. Robert raised an eyebrow. Yes. Olivia's heartbeat quickened. Mr. Miller, you wouldn't happen to be related to the Miller in Miller Industries, would you? Robert chuckled. I am the Miller in Miller Industries, Olivia. A sharp ringing noise filled her ears, like the world had just tilted sideways. She stared at him. You're CEO, founder, owner, Robert listed casually, stirring his chowder. But none of that matters, really. What matters is this diner. Olivia sank into the booth across from him, her hands trembling as she tore open the envelope. Inside was a bank statement. Her eyes darted to the number printed in bold black ink at the bottom. $5 million. Olivia gasped so hard, she nearly choked on air. This can't be right, she stammered. It's not a gift, Robert said, his voice firm but kind. It's a debt. One that I've owed for 70 years. The diner spun around her. $5 million? That wasn't just money. That was a second chance. That was enough to save the diner, renovate it, pay off every loan, and keep it running for generations. I can't accept this, Olivia whispered. Robert's expression softened. Olivia, listen to me, he said, reaching across the table to place a warm, steady hand over hers. When I was a boy, your grandfather told me something I never forgot. He said, a single meal can change a person's life. Olivia swallowed hard. And he was right, Robert continued. That one bowl of chowder? It set off a chain of events that led me here. To this seat. In this diner. In front of you. She shook her head, overwhelmed. But why now? Why not years ago? Robert smiled, eyes twinkling. Because I needed to make sure I could repay it properly. He gestured toward the envelope. $5 million is nothing to me now, Olivia. But this diner is everything. And I won't let it disappear. Olivia's chest ached. All the sleepless nights, the fear of closing down, the constant worry gone. Just like that. She blinked back tears and let out a shaky laugh. You sure you don't just want free chowder for life? She joked, her voice still unsteady. Robert grinned. That's already part of the deal. After closing early for the first time in years, Olivia and Robert sat at the counter, going through the plans. You don't have to change everything, Robert said. This diner has history. We just need to modernize it, bring it into the future while keeping its soul intact. They called in the best, architects and designers, to renovate without erasing the diner's vintage charm. Marketing experts, to spread the diner's story through social media. Top chefs, to refine the menu without losing its heart. Within weeks, the changes began. New interiors, same heart, the cracked linoleum was replaced, but the original booths were kept. A neon sign was added outside. Olivia's Diner, a taste of Brooklyn's history. An online presence video was posted online, telling the diner's story. Within days, the post had hundreds of thousands of shares. People flocked to Olivia's Diner, eager to be a part of history. The menu revamped, the famous clam chowder stayed. But new dishes were introduced, classic flavors with a modern twist. As the weeks passed, Olivia watched in disbelief as Olivia's Diner became the talk of New York. Lines wrapped around the block. Customers left glowing reviews. The best chowder I've ever had. Plus, the story behind this place is amazing. A piece of history kept alive in the most beautiful way. One evening, Olivia looked at Robert as they watched the bustling diner, filled with smiling faces and full tables. You did this, she whispered. Robert shook his head.
No, Olivia.
Your grandfather did this. I just made sure it wasn't forgotten. Late one evening, Olivia stood by the window, looking outside at the city she loved. Then she saw him.
A boy.
No older than 10.
Thin.
Wearing a worn-out hoodie. Standing outside Olivia's diner, staring through the window, just like Robert had 70 years ago. Her heart clenched. She turned toward Robert, who had been watching, too. Without a word, she removed her apron and walked to the door. "Hey, kid." The boy looked up, startled. "You hungry?" The boy hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Come in," Olivia said, holding the door open. "No one goes hungry here." As he stepped inside, Robert smiled knowingly, wiping a tear from his eye. The cycle had begun again. The legacy of Olivia's diner would live on. 1 month after Robert Miller's investment, Olivia's diner was unrecognizable, but in the best way possible. The once empty booths were now always full. The sounds of sizzling griddles, clinking coffee mugs, and laughter filled the space. The vintage charm remained, but the small details, the polished wooden floors, the upgraded lighting, the carefully restored countertops, breathed new life into the old diner. And Olivia? For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. Hope that the diner would survive. Hope that her grandfather's legacy would live on. But most of all, hope that her daughter, Emma, would see the value of this place, too. The doorbell jingled, and Emma Jackson stepped inside. She was 26 years old, sharp-witted, ambitious, and fiercely independent. With her sleek dark hair pulled into a high ponytail and dressed in a tailored jacket, she looked every bit the New Yorker she had become. "Wow, Mom." She glanced around, impressed. "The place looks incredible." Olivia, who had been behind the counter, whirled around in surprise. "Emma," she gasped, setting down the coffee pot. She hadn't expected her daughter to fly in from Paris so soon. Emma had been studying at one of the world's most prestigious culinary schools, training under Michelin star chefs. Emma took off her coat and set it on the back of a chair. "I had to see it for myself," she said, smiling. "You know, you've been all over the internet, right? The story about Robert Grandpa Samuel, the renovation, people love it. There's even a feature in the New York Times." Olivia chuckled, shaking her head. "Yeah, I guess I'm a celebrity now," she joked. Emma leaned against the counter, looking at her mother curiously. "So, what's next?" Olivia hesitated. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment she could finally ask her daughter the question that had been on her mind for years. "Emma, I know you've built a life in Paris. You're doing amazing things, and I don't want to get in the way of that. But," Olivia swallowed hard, "have you ever thought about coming back? About taking over the diner one day?" Emma's smile faltered. "Mom, you don't have to answer right now," Olivia added quickly, forcing a light-hearted laugh. "Just think about it." But Emma didn't need to think. She had already made up her mind. She just didn't know how to tell her mother yet. The next morning, Emma woke up to the familiar clatter of pots and pans from the kitchen. She smiled. Some things never change. Curious, she wandered in, tying a spare apron around her waist. Olivia was already at the stove, stirring a pot of clam chowder, the very same recipe her grandfather had perfected decades ago. "You're still making it the old way, huh?" Emma teased. Olivia glanced at her daughter with a smirk. "Don't mess with perfection, kid." Emma rolled her eyes, then reached for a ladle and took a small sip of the chowder. She paused. "It's perfect, Mom. But," she tapped her chin, deep in thought, "what if we added just a hint of smoked paprika? It would give the broth a richer depth." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Paprika? That's not exactly classic." "No, but it could be our twist on the classic." For a moment, Olivia hesitated. Then she nodded. "All right, Chef Jackson. Let's try it your way." For the next few weeks, Emma worked tirelessly in the kitchen, testing new recipes while preserving the soul of the diner. She kept the classics, the clam chowder, the buttermilk pancakes, the homemade apple pie. But she added new, bold flavors, taking inspiration from her experiences in Paris and around the world. Truffle-infused scrambled eggs for a modern breakfast twist. Gourmet grilled cheese with aged cheddar and caramelized onions. A Brooklyn-style burger with garlic aioli and house-made pickles. At first, Olivia was skeptical. People don't come here for fancy food, Emma. They come here for comfort. Emma grinned, wiping her hands on a towel. Who says it can't be both? And she was right. The new menu took off like wildfire. Customers raved about the mix of nostalgia and innovation. The younger crowd was hooked, while the regulars still found comfort in the dishes they had loved for decades. For the first time in Olivia's diner's history, people weren't just coming for the past, they were coming for the future. One evening, after closing, Robert Miller sat at his usual booth, watching as Olivia and Emma worked side by side. He smiled to himself. "You know," he said, setting down his coffee cup, "your grandfather would be proud, Olivia." Olivia turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "Yeah."
Yeah.
He nodded toward Emma. And he'd be proud of her, too. Emma paused, looking at Robert. "You really think so?" Robert's gaze softened. "Absolutely. You're not changing this diner, Emma. You're making sure it stays alive for the next 70 years. Emma exhaled, nodding slowly. I think I want to stay, Mom." She looked at Olivia, her voice steady but emotional. "I want to be part of this. I want to make sure this place never dies." Olivia felt a lump in her throat. This was all she had ever wanted. She reached over and took Emma's hand. "Then let's do it together." Robert smiled, taking one last sip of his coffee. "Well then," he said, standing up and stretching, "it looks like the diner's in good hands after all." A week later, on a particularly chilly evening, Olivia noticed a small boy standing outside the diner. His clothes were worn, his hands stuffed into his pockets, his eyes peering longingly through the window. Her heart clenched. "Emma," Olivia called softly. Her daughter looked up, then followed her gaze. Emma's chest tightened. The boy looked just like Robert had described himself 70 years ago. Without hesitation, she untied her apron, walked over, and opened the door. "Hey, kid," she said gently. The boy looked up, his big, nervous eyes meeting hers. "You hungry?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Come in," she said, holding the door open just like her great-grandfather once had. "There's always food for you here." As the boy stepped inside, Olivia and Robert exchanged a knowing glance. And just like that, the legacy continued. Months passed, and Olivia's diner had become more than just a popular neighborhood spot. It was a symbol, a place where past and future coexisted, where kindness had built something lasting. The story of Robert Miller, of Olivia's grandfather, of the diner's rebirth, it had captured the hearts of people far beyond New York. Food bloggers, newspaper journalists, and even television hosts came to witness the little diner that refused to die. One day, a well-dressed man walked in, his clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the diner's interior with keen interest. "Excuse me," he said, approaching the counter. "Are you Olivia Jackson?" Olivia, who had been stacking freshly washed mugs, looked up, surprised. "That's me." The man smiled warmly and handed her a business card. "New York City Heritage Committee, Cultural Preservation Officer." Mark Daniels, her breath caught. "Heritage Committee?" she repeated. "Yes, Ms. Jackson. We've been reviewing historical establishments in New York that have stood the test of time, places with deep cultural significance. Olivia's Diner is one of them. You've been nominated for recognition as an official New York City historical landmark." The entire diner froze. Emma, who had been preparing a plate of pancakes, turned sharply. Robert, sipping his usual black coffee, set his cup down slowly, his eyes widening. A landmark, Olivia echoed, still processing the words. Mark Daniels nodded. Your grandfather built this place after World War II. It survived economic downturns, gentrification, and nearly shut down, yet it still stands, stronger than ever. The committee believes this diner represents something rare, not just history, but human kindness passed through generations. Emma pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes sparkling. Mom, she whispered, do you know what this means? The diner will be protected forever. It can't be demolished, bought out, or replaced. Robert smiled proudly. Looks like Samuel Jackson's kindness is going to live on longer than any of us. Olivia's chest tightened with emotion. She had fought for years to keep this place alive, to honor her grandfather, to give it meaning. And now, it was officially part of New York's history. She took a shaky breath and looked at Mark. What do I need to do? Just say yes, Miss Jackson. She didn't hesitate. Yes. 2 months later, Olivia's diner was packed to the brim. City officials, local journalists, longtime customers, and brand new visitors all gathered to celebrate. A plaque was placed outside the diner, its golden letters glistening in the autumn sun. New York City historical landmark, a single meal can change a life. Samuel Jackson, founder Olivia ran her fingers over the engraving, her throat tight. It was real. She turned to Robert, who was standing beside her, a rare emotion in his eyes. You did it, Olivia, he murmured. No, she said, shaking her head. We did it. Robert chuckled. Well, in that case, how about a bowl of chowder to celebrate? She laughed, wiping away a tear. On the house, Mr. Miller. As the celebration died down, Emma stood behind the counter, flipping through an old photo album her mother had brought out. There were black and white pictures of her great-grandfather, smiling behind the counter. A young Robert Miller, sitting at the diner as a child, wide-eyed with a bowl of chowder. And now, a modern photo of her and Olivia, standing side by side in the kitchen. She glanced up and saw Olivia watching her. You ready, kid? Olivia asked, raising an eyebrow. Emma smiled. Yeah, Mom. I'm ready. They stood side by side, mother and daughter, past and future, cooking together as the diner bustled around them. Late that night, as Emma wiped down the counter, she noticed a familiar sight outside the window. A young boy, no older than 10, standing alone in the cold. His hoodie was too thin for the season. His hands were tucked into his pockets, his eyes darting toward the window, hungry but hesitant. Emma felt her heart squeeze. Robert had told her about this moment, how history had a way of repeating itself. She untied her apron, walked to the door, and pushed it open.
Hey, kid, she called.
The boy turned, his face full of hesitation. You hungry? He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Come on in, Emma said, smiling warmly. We have a rule here. No one leaves hungry. The boy hesitated for only a second longer before stepping inside. Emma led him to a booth, just as her great-grandfather had once done for Robert Miller. She brought him a steaming bowl of clam chowder and a plate of warm toast. As she placed it in front of him, the boy's hands shook slightly, his eyes wide with gratitude. Emma smiled, sitting across from him. Eat, kid, she said softly. No one should go hungry here. And just like that, the cycle continued. As the boy ate his meal, Olivia leaned against the counter, watching Emma with quiet pride. Robert stood beside her, his hands in his pockets. Your grandfather would be proud, he murmured. Olivia nodded. Yeah, she whispered. I think he would. Outside, the golden plaque glistened in the city lights. Inside, A boy who had been cold and hungry found warmth and comfort. And across from him sat a woman carrying on a tradition that had started 70 years ago. A tradition built on a simple truth: a single meal can change a life.